Everybody, as panelists or attendees are coming in, we'll get started in just a minute. This event will be recorded. Just saw a question from the audience, and we'll get started in about a minute. All right, we've got about 30 folks here so far, and we'll also be posting this live on Facebook, and we've been getting about 10 to 25 additional folks watching on Facebook. So we'll go ahead and get started as folks roll in. Welcome to the Interfaith panel on environment, climate, and justice, part of this year's virtual Piedmont Earth Day Fair hosted by Piedmont Environmental Alliance. I'm Jamie Meyer. I'm the Executive Director at Piedmont Environmental Alliance, and I'm so glad you could join us for this program. Piedmont Environmental Alliance is your local nonprofit based in Winston-Salem, serving the Piedmont region. We believe in the power of people to create a more just, resilient, and environmentally sustainable future. And that's why we focus on programs that educate people of all ages, build connections across the community, and create tangible change in our local institutions. You can learn more about all of the work that we do at our website, peanc.org. This year's Piedmont Earth Day Fair may be virtual, but we have tons of great programs to educate and inspire people of all ages about environmental issues that matter. So I hope everyone checks out our full schedule of events and visits our webpage to register for more events. We've still got a couple days left of our Earth Week. And a big thank you to this year's virtual Piedmont Earth Day Fair sponsors who've made this program possible. Now, before we begin, a quick housekeeping note for everyone. If you have questions or comments, please use the question function on Zoom. We'll be sorting through those questions and putting them into our conversation today. Now, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Rabbi Mark Cohn serves at Temple Emmanuel, where he focuses on meaningful and engaged Jewish living, a deep love of Israel, and environmental sensitivity. He's a dedicated interfaith leader who works intentionally on social justice matters. Associate Chaplain for Muslim Students at Wake Forest University, Naijla Faizi. Oh, I forgot to ask how to say your last name, Naijla. Sorry about that. We'll have you say it if I said it incorrectly. But Naijla is passionate about the development of Muslim youth and cultivating them into advocates for the Muslim community by equipping them with the language, tools, knowledge, and confidence to navigate a society that privileges non-Muslim communities. In her free time, Naijla enjoys spending time with her family and friends, hiking, enjoying the outdoors, traveling, and trying new food. Me too, for all of those things. We also have Bishop Todd Fulton with us today, who is senior pastor and founder of the Mount Moriah Outreach Center in Kernersville. Bishop Fulton is passionate about food justice and social justice and helps operate a food pantry that serves more than 500 people. Reverend Craig Schaub is the pastor of Parkway United Church of Christ and is engaged in a variety of local efforts to promote equity and environmental justice. He is a spouse, parent, gardener, and student of permaculture. All right, without any further ado, we're going to jump in. We've got some questions ready for the group. And then, like I said, participants at any time, you can feel free to use the question function and we'll throw your questions into the mix. But we're here to have a great conversation about the environment. So the first question that we came up with today is, how does your faith tradition inform decisions that you make that impact the environment? How does your faith tradition impact the way you understand our climate crisis? Who wants to start us off today? Todd, do you want to start us off? I'll just pick questions.
So in my faith tradition, in our Old Testament, Psalm 24, the earth is the Lord and the fullness thereof, and they that dwell therein. So we all have a responsibility, if we are people of faith, to take care of Mother Earth and to do things in our congregation to make sure that we're sustaining Earth for the next generation and for generations to come. And it's not just in lip service, but it's an actual doing things like getting youth groups involved to go clean out creeks or pick up paper in our neighborhood and just make sure that our carbon footprint is leaves the earth better off than when we came along.
Excellent. Who else can share about how the faith tradition informs decisions you're making about the environment, about sustainability, or the way you're thinking about climate change?
So I'll jump in. I'm going to take us, Bishop Todd. We just call it the Hebrew Bible, but
okay.
I'm glad we can share that text together. And I'm going to take us all the way to Genesis 1, where we hear the creation story, and there's this tremendous balance. I mean, we might think it's 7 days all in sequential order, but look at it for a second. Day 1, God says, let there be light, but we don't have the sun, the moon, and stars until day 4. On day 2, God says, let there be an expanse in the midst of the water, and yet it's not till day 5 that we get the water swarming with fish and all the various things and the birds flying up above. Day 3, we hear about the water that's there kind of gathering in one place, and then the dry land appearing so that the earth can sprout vegetation, but we don't actually have anything living on that dry land until day 6. So really day 1 and day 4 belong together, 2 and 5, and 3 and 6. So they really, there's this beautiful balance that's happening. We learn that it's inherent in the creation story, and creation is only complete when we have the Sabbath, which means to rest. And herein lies the problem with the climate change. We're not letting the earth rest. In fact, in Jewish life, we read elsewhere in Leviticus and in Deuteronomy about that 6 years you work the land, and next year actually is going to be what's called a Shemitah year. This is a Sabbath year for the land to rest. If we don't let the land rest, you have climate change. We are responsible keepers of the garden, which shows up in Genesis 2 and what sometimes is called the second creation story, that we are to be servants of the garden and workers of it. We are responsible for it. And the rabbis teach us of old, they say that if you do not take care of the earth, and if you destroy my world, God says, if you don't take care of it, there will be no one left after you to repair it. So from the get-go, we are responsible for this creation and everybody who lives on it. And indeed, I love that you brought from Psalm 24. We are a part of the creation and the fullness thereof.
I'd love to follow up on what Rabbi Mark is saying, because we have a really similar concept in the Quran of Muslims being the stewardesses of the earth. There's a word khalifa or khulafa that's used in the Quran, that we are vicegerents. We are these servants of the earth, that it is your responsibility as a human being to care for the earth. And actually, so Muslims believe that the Quran is the literal word of God as it was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad. And in the Quran, over and over again, God talks about the corruption of the earth. And the way that this term is interpreted by a variety of Muslim scholars is that we know that human beings will intentionally corrupt the earth, right? That we are contributing to the climate change crisis that we see, but it's simultaneously our responsibility to take care of the earth and make sure that the way God's natural order exists, that we are contributing to that in a positive way. There are really beautiful things about, just like what Rabbi Mark was saying, that everything is God's creation, right? It's our responsibility, the order in which everything was really put into existence, that, you know, there's an ecological balance to everything. Muslims believe that nothing was done sort of randomly, that everything that God created was for a purpose. The air, the way that it moves, the water, even every little insect. And there are some verses, chapter 6, verse 38, that talks about how all of God's creations have rights with God, and that they have independent relationships with God, that they are their own community. So just like human beings believe that, you know, we have rights or we have relationships with God, that all of God's creations in the earth also have those rights and relationships. So it's our responsibility to recognize sort of how we need to, in more just and equitable ways, treat the environment and the creatures that are living with us together.
Wow, that's very helpful. I want to just pick up on that piece about who we are as human beings. I think Rabbi Mark talked about the creation stories, and one way to talk about the human being is to really to read that text of the creation of the human as the soil creature, the dirt creature, and it gives us an entirely different perspective on who we are in relationship to the rest of creation. So I have to say, really a lot of this work is unlearning, deconstructing so much of what I've learned or heard growing up and in even my adult life, as shaped in a predominantly Eurocentric Christian tradition. So it really means seeing all of the sacred text afresh, and seeing a different sense of who we are as human beings, humbly, very humbly, constantly learning, constantly receiving the sense of abundance from creation, the wisdom from creation, so that we can thrive collectively. I would say, you know, trying to relearn who Jesus of Nazareth actually is, not some colonizing, sexually prudish separator that we, in the Eurocentric Christian tradition, particularly in North America, have made him to be. In fact, a very indigenous person, learning constantly by being in creation, and that informing then what human community actually becomes.
Craig, I loved what you had to say about relearning the traditions and texts and kind of the rationalizations that we've been using for a lot of years for a lot of things in this country and beyond. We had a question from a participant that I think some of you started to speak to, but I wonder if there's anything else in this way of relearning or rethinking how different traditions understand man having dominion over fish, birds, livestock, and every creeping thing from Genesis. I think, Naijla, you spoke to this about kind of this combination of both kind of the awareness that humans are corrupting our planet, and also this kind of justification that's been used in the past that, well, we own everything, we get to do with it what we will. Anything to add about how this understanding is changing or in this moment?
I'll just say that human beings, so the way that, you know, I've kind of read about it and been learning from the Quranic perspective or the Islamic perspective is that, yes, God has put, you know, these things into the earth, some of which can be used for human beings, but that you have a responsibility in how you use them or maybe have dominion over them. There are lots of sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, we call them hadith, that talk about, you know, how you're not supposed to waste water. If you're going to kill an animal, it has to be done in a very particular way in the name of God, and that You cannot just kill something, for no reason at all. And so there is this dual responsibility that humans have in maybe feeling like they have some sort of, I think in the Quranic perspective, humans don't have as much of a higher status or superiority over other creations. It's more of like an equitable balance that you're supposed to have in society. But I will say that, as human beings, while we might feel that because we have the ability to think and process things, you have that additional responsibility to take care of all of these things in the earth that, we're coexisting with.
I would add, if I could, onto that, which is when we hit that verse, when it says about that the humanity will conquer and have dominion, it just drives me crazy. And I know there is a rabbinic kind of deconstruction of it that looks at it and says, well, it could mean this, it means that. But I would point to two things. One is later in Torah, we're going to hear in Deuteronomy that when you're making a war against a city, now not a pleasant context, I'm not going to lie there, but it says don't destroy the fruit trees. And we take out, and this is not me, 21st century, kind of progressive rabbi. This is rabbinic, like 2nd, 3rd, 4th century in Israel. They excise and take out the concept of what's known as bal tashchit, don't destroy. We can't destroy the things that we're going to need, because obviously, while it may seem self-serving at the time, it's only going to further hurt even your enemy. Right? This is your enemy you're attacking, and this is their fruit trees. Don't destroy them. You've got an issue with them, deal with the issue. But the fruit trees and the tree, like the earth, it hurts all of us if we hurt that. And so that's what I want to add there.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. And we're really seeing that, right? That, this idea that humans somehow deserve dominion over the planet, is now leading us to a place where we're going to really have to worry in the future about our food supply, about, the water that we have to drink, about all sorts of things. So, I think that being in balance, in the end isn't good for any of us. I think we can agree. So I wanted to get into some specific ways that your faith communities are practicing environmental sustainability and repair. What are some projects or programs that you've developed with sustainability and environmental justice in mind? And, I think we have a great audience here today that may be able to take some of these ideas and bring them if they've got faith communities or other communities as well. So just sharing some of the work that we're doing.
Well, I can share in some of the things that we're doing here at our church, which is a stretch for an African-American church. We're harvesting rainwater. So we partner with Cooperative Extension, and we have 2 600-gallon cisterns on both sides of our church. So when we get 1 inch of rain, we harvest 1,200 gallons of water. So with our urban farm, we're able to use this water to water our plants. I also use this water to water our chickens and our livestock. So it is, we have a creek at the back of our property, and what harvesting of this 1,200 gallons of water does is it keeps a lot of water that would have just, washed into the creek with the debris and other things. It keeps it out of the creek. So that's one thing among many that we've started here at Mount Moriah.
One of the things that we're known for at Temple are our environmental movies that we've been doing this for over 10 years, I think now. We show an environmental movie, and then we pull in local resources of individuals who, whether it's a movie about food supply, about soil, about water, who are the local individuals involved with that, so that we can learn how to handle that, specifically in Winston-Salem and Forsyth County. So education is one thing that we want to offer for ourselves as the Jewish community, but we broaden it out. We want all of us, or those who are interested, to learn more. I think there's certain things, volunteering, whether it's in things like Creek Week or working with various community gardens in town. I think advocacy is something that we can work on with one another, whether it's local, state, or federal, to work with each other and try to lobby our our state senators and people in the even up in the Congress level. Though a lot is decided locally, a lot gets decided right here with our supervising intents.
So many of you may know that we're in the holy month of Ramadan for Muslims. So this involves fasting. And for a lot of Muslim communities, it also involves a lot of consumption on the other end of opening those fasts, usually in the evening. And so there have been some really great initiatives for mosques or Muslim communities to have more green Ramadans. So encouraging, like, have no meat days where you're having food so that you reduce your meat consumption, encouraging folks to bring their own water bottles so that you're not having to pass out plastic water bottles. It's really common that when you're opening your fast without water all day, you're very, very thirsty. And so if you have your own water, you can refill it. There are other initiatives like no plastic iftars to, not have any single-use plastics during these types of times. I think other things that, the Muslim community could probably be a lot better on is learning how to compost some of that stuff, doing better recycling. I think education is a really great key piece. One thing that I was really privileged to experience growing up, our mosque would do a lot of outdoor activities. So we would go to parks or picnics or lakes, and just being able to connect with nature spiritually and recognize that, the earth is a sacred space for us. And, we have a responsibility to take care of it, I think is a small step in helping create that sort of eco consciousness in people.
I liked how Naijla, you were describing this integration with the important aspects of faith tradition. That integration is so important. And I think we do a good bit of, retreats and opportunities to connect with creation, build a sense of intimacy and love, because I know what we love, we tend to protect, and what we protect, we take a risk in advocating for. So that's an important dimension, integrating it to our worship and our faith formation. Actually, our youth group, these 3 weeks is engaged in a virtual mission trip with an organization called Incredible Days, and they're working on creation justice. And they have projects to do in between their check-ins, and excited to see what comes of that. But one of the things that I think Parkway's been working on is reducing our waste in every way, elimination of paper products in all ways, reducing our carbon footprint and how we heat and cool. We recently have started a compost pile. So if you don't have your own compost pile at home, you can bring it to church. The amazing thing, we've really tried with our peculiar slanted roof to figure out how to put solar panels on. Then we were talking to some of our partners in Raleigh, and they are doing a compost project. They also have solar panels on their building, but they were saying they are sequestering as much carbon by their compost project as they are having solar panels. So that's a profound insight for us. Just, not just throwing that organic material into the municipal waste stream can have a huge effect. We have been inspired by Mount Moriah Outreach. In 2 weeks, we've got a work project where we're going to do rainwater collection so that we can irrigate our native pollinator garden that we have outside of our big window of our sanctuary. In terms of faith formation, for more than 2 years, a group in our congregation with others has been meeting every week to look at the drawdown strategies. Drawdown is this amazing book of the best strategies for addressing climate crisis. And they go pretty deep in integrating science with spirituality in their discussions on that. One other thing I will mention, if you don't know about it, you can calculate your carbon footprint, and then that annual calculation, you can offset that carbon by contributing a host of projects around the globe within a group called Blessed Tomorrow. And you can stay in touch and learn how those projects are going, whether that is cook stoves for women and girls in Central Africa, or this year we're supporting reforestation of a region of the Tennessee Appalachians. So,
Craig, I think that brings up such an interesting point of the importance of, you'll excuse the term, but like cross-pollination, of you learn what are best practices that we can get from one another, so that we're not reinventing the wheel, and what's worked or what hasn't worked, how to get buy-in from our constituent members of our various communities, and I'm a big advocate in our own individual actions. What do we specifically in our own families or whatever do? And if in your compost pile you can figure out what to do with pumpkin seeds, I need answers, because I got all kinds of growth happening. The other piece is, how do we think larger, right, on a policy level? What's happening in corporations? Because that's where the big change comes. But I love that. I'm already getting ideas of things that we could be doing over at Temple, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I love that. I love a couple things that you just said as well, Rabbi Mark. One is, I think that's right. I think that one way that we can come together is to learn what each different community group, faith community is doing, and to start to learn and share those things. And then our next question is about what you were just talking about. What specific practices and strategies can people of faith and conscience engage in to be part of climate justice? What can we do in a bigger way? You know, this idea, Reverend Craig, that you brought up, of advocacy and activism. How can faith communities work with one another to support larger institutional change, both locally and beyond? It's a big question.
I'll start with, I have this saying that charity begins on your street, and then it spreads throughout the block, and then throughout the city, and then throughout the state, and throughout the world. So if you just start doing something in your faith tradition, for example, we've started an urban farm. We have 50 chickens, 6 beehives, 2 rain cisterns that are taking in 1,200 gallons of rain. We have a closed system, so I can tell you, Rabbi Mark, what to do with those pumpkin seeds. Those chickens will turn those pumpkin seeds into great compost. So there's a closed system with our food bank. We feed over 1,000 people. So we have a lot of produce because of lack of refrigeration, that when we don't get rid of it, it begins to decompose. So with the chicken, the bread that is outdated, we give it to the chickens, and then they turn into compost. We put the compost back on our garden, and we do the cycle all over again. So it is a closed cycle. We water the garden with the rainwater. So by doing this locally, I am empowering my congregants to take on a citywide and statewide challenge when it comes to climate change. So begin in your neck of the woods, your street, and then move on one step at a time.
For me, I think about where are the parts, I mean, obviously I'm working from the Jewish tradition. What are the parts that already are there to teach us? So we have right in the heart of winter, we have a holiday that is known as the New Year for the Trees. We actually have 4 New Years in Jewish time. And the New Year for the Trees it had to do with tithing in the days of the temple, that when was the end of there was no more fruit coming from last year's harvest. And then you're about to get the trees to start to bud for the new year. That's right in the heart of winter for all those fruit trees. Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, which is the big one that notes the calendar and the change of the year, that's about the creation of the world. Every night and every morning we have blessings about the light and the dark and the creation effectively. Every month we bless the new moon because we follow the lunar calendar, like in the Muslim world. And I meant to say Ramadan Mubarak to you and to your community. But every 28 years, as I learned, it's already about 13 years. I think we're right in the middle. Every 28 years, we there's a blessing for the creator of the sun. That we follow the solar calendar as well in Jewish life. That's why our holidays always fall in the same time of year, as opposed to like Ramadan in the Muslim calendar, that things are going to shift back. So I think it's a matter of finding what is in our traditions already, and every faith tradition. We've got 3 represented here today. There are obviously many more. They're always going to come back to something earth, find it there, grow up from there and in it, and to say, aha, look at that. I'm being commanded or told or advocate to do something with that blessing, with that concept.
I think like a lot of other types of change, before the panel started, some of us were having conversations about social justice advocacy and things like that. And just like social justice advocacy for maybe race issues or LGBTQ+ community, even climate change needs, a concerted collective effort where people are organized and coming together. And in doing research for today, I heard other, Muslim scholars who are more well-read than me on this topic who said, bring interfaith communities together so that their constituents can talk together in safe spaces for themselves about how they can brainstorm for solutions and organize around these issues. And so I think that's maybe a small way where you can both promote interfaith dialogue and help educate each other about how our traditions are informing these practices and how we should think about climate change, while also making space for our practitioners to be able to talk with one another in the community about what we can be doing differently. I mean, listening to Bishop Todd and everything that his church is doing is remarkable. And so those are just like, this is such a small instance of something that we could easily recreate in our communities.
I think now, as we try to live in this new reality, the first thing that we may be called to is a recommitment to relationship building with one another across faith traditions, across congregations, so that we can really trust each other in whatever action we take. I think that's really important. And then also to build on what's already happening across our community. Certainly PEA, there are lots of things happening, and to pay attention to that and to plug into those as we see they align with our values and our passions. But a couple of things I think might have a particular focus for us in the local community, building on what Todd said. I think the integration of environmental justice and food justice right now in our community is essential. Everybody eats, everybody is interested in eating, no matter where we live and what tradition we worship out of. I think there is real potential for us as an interreligious force to join together with others who are already looking at that. I was on the Urban Food Policy Council Summit last weekend. They are trying to loosen up some of the ordinances of food production in the city of Syracuse or city of Winston-Salem right now. And so we want to keep supporting that kind of work. We want to support hubs of food and water resilience that we at faith communities can support across neighborhoods. So that would be one. Secondly, I'm really interested that the Winston-Salem City Council on Monday evening pass that apology resolution, making apology for urban renewal, Jim Crow, housing segregation. I think we can build on that. I think there is a lot of public dialogue, consciousness raising that can happen right now. And one of them is the ways that this city has been zoned, putting low-income housing next to major industry along the 52 corridor. And the health and limitation legacy of especially children having to live proximate to those toxins is something that we need to really reckon with as a local community. I'll stop.
Yeah, those are really powerful ideas that you're talking about. And I think, I think food justice, I think all the ways that environment and climate and justice combine and connect, we've got a lot of room for growth in Winston-Salem. And I loved what you said about starting with those relationships, and just like what Naijla said about starting in that interfaith dialogue. We have enormous power when we come together. And I think just seeing that play out in faith communities coming together and in other groups coming together is really powerful. A quick question from an audience member on this topic, but then a little bit broader, is do you think climate conventions or norms like the Paris Agreement are vital to deal with climate crisis? And how do we balance injustice and justice when we have these global solutions that have to deal with differences in countries' development and resource use, right? So it's kind of we're starting in an uneven playing field, but we need global action. How do you all understand this strategy of global climate conventions and norms?
I think one of the things that's helped me the most with climate and sacred grounds is working with the Apache tribe and Native Americans who have been fighting like hell to preserve their sacred sites. And it's taken so much struggle to get politicians and even presidents to understand, when you speak of justice, it's all about, for corporate America and even around the world, it's all about the mighty dollar. So when you dig up someone's burial ancestor sites for mines or copper or any other mineral or precious metal, it goes back to, everything is centered around money. So we can have all of the talks and talk about, what's going on around the world around these climate talks. But when we look right here in America, how the Native Americans are just struggling to keep an area that they were pushed on to a reservation. And they took this whole country from them, pushed them into one little block of land, and now they want that block of land. So it just grieves my heart to think about that. So I think we have to be honest that it's really not so much about the environment for world leaders, it's more about monetary gain.
I definitely thank you for that, Todd. As people of faith, I think we really need to take a stand on some of these sacred sites that are so jeopardized right now of our indigenous siblings and nibblings. Not only Oak Flat of the Apache stronghold of the San Carlos Apache in Arizona, but right now, very threatened is the reconstruction of Line 3 and in northern Minnesota of several Ojibwa reservations where they are trying to maintain their tradition of wild rice gathering. Their water sources are in jeopardy, their sacred sites. So there are calls for those of us of other faith traditions to stand with them right now. But I think this is an important question as well. And what we know is the last 4 years, when we backed away as the United States from the Paris Accords, so many things happened at a local level. And we need to continue to stoke that energy, not to ignore the global conversation whatsoever, but we need to be doing both. And right now, one of our priorities, I think, for the global climate crisis is the United States made a commitment in the Obama administration to offer $3 billion in the Green Climate Fund for local sustainable projects, primarily of women and girls. We've only lived out 1 billion of that 3 billion commitment. So now is the time to invest in solidarity with those local communities, doing what they already know how to do to build resilience.
And I would only add that climate change is the presenting problem of a much larger injustice in what we're seeing, which is a draining of resources, often typically from the least advantaged of communities, whether it's locally, and we're talking about Native Americans here in the United States, or places in Africa, or so many places where just the resources are being sapped and it's hurting individuals. So it becomes a racial issue, and it's a people issue in so many ways.
Yeah, I think what's clear, and I think that Todd, you said this really well, but right, we can't really separate out any of these issues, right? Climate can't be separated from, the type of capitalism, unrestrained capitalism that we see from, kind of even some of these basic ideas of our, understanding of some of these traditional texts and the rights that we have as people to do what we will. I think that, all of these ideas that we're talking about are connected, and we see it in both the problems and the solutions. Another audience question I'm going to ask, building on what we've said about environmental justice, what initiatives or discussions have your faith communities had about this intersectional nature of environmentalism and about, the kind of these bigger connectivity issues?
We've not had a lot. I'll be honest. I mean, we've not. First of all, COVID has dominated a whole lot over this year. That is not an excuse. I'm just saying that the reality is we've had a lot on our plates. We've certainly talked about COVID and the impact that it's had on communities of color in many ways, the economic change and what that means in communities of color in particular. That's certainly been on our plate this year. Talking about the environment and those terms is not something that we have yet hit to talk about.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think as the Muslim community is trying to understand their place as American Muslims and oftentimes defend themselves against Islamophobia and try to understand, the racism within our own community, we've maybe focused on a lot of other issues, but I would say in line with really what Bishop Todd and Craig were talking about is that there are conversations that are connecting environmental justice to food justice, right? Talking about food deserts and how, if we have food banks or community gardens, they're not very in-depth conversations, but I think that's, a beginning stage to some of these broader issues because they are interconnected. You talk about power and global politics and developed countries versus underdeveloped countries and the impact that colonization has had on whether or not a country can really consider themselves part of a global conversation on climate change. So yeah, it's a little all over the place, but also, my parents, my heritage comes from Pakistan, a country that deals with a lot of really, really horrible pollution. So it is something that's in the minds of maybe particularly the immigrant community, because they recognize that there's a difference here in the United States from what they experienced growing up, that there's a value in keeping your environment clean and that it takes effort in order to do that, right? That we shouldn't pollute or litter or things like that. And I would say the young American Muslim community is doing a lot better job of having those interconnected conversations around justice and climate change, and how fights for housing equity and what Craig was talking about around making sure that housing is not placed in a toxic location. Those are conversations that are happening amongst a much younger population, usually in more urban environments like DC or New York City.
And Jamie, Craig, Rabbi Mark, and myself are all a part of a local ministers conference, which is an ecumenical interfaith organization. We have a community garden in a food desert, which is in a primary Black neighborhood. And I couldn't be there last Saturday, but we planted a community garden. Reverend Schaub, clearly a white man, was at the helm of this community garden to make sure that we are empowering the community to grow their own food. So once again, just going back to your local area and making an impact with the food justice, then you're making an impact with environmental justice and with social justice. So I was very proud of that. We planted probably a half an acre of produce that prayerfully will make it through the frost this weekend and start growing soon. So we hadn't necessarily had a conversation, but we have put feet to the vision by actually going out and connecting with the community and doing something.
I think this is really a profound question for us to focus on right now. And I would say only because we as mainline Protestants have had a lot of catching up to do. I think this past year, we've spent a lot of time in our congregation on Zoom, really looking at these intersections, not only on a national level, but more and more now we've got study and action groups about the local intersections of these issues, including environmental justice. You know, it's 30 years ago, it's the 30th anniversary of the first people of color environmental justice conference. Really started here in North Carolina, this movement in Warren County, where they were throwing toxic things along the roadside, and people organized, people of faith organized, primarily people of African descent organized and said, no, not in our community. This will not continue to happen. And it has spurred this environmental justice movement that continues to grow. And this intersection is the only way for us to be thinking about climate justice right now. And I would say the hope for proposed infrastructural legislation that's on the table, we can advocate that those most impacted, particularly the workers who would no longer have jobs or communities no longer have support in the fossil fuel industry, are front and center in being retooled for a new way of participating in our economy.
Jamie, I'd like to also add to that, once again, on a local level, the Ministers Conference and so many others who were focusing on climate change did a big rally around Duke Energy with Blues Creek right here in Forsyth County, where they were, problems with coal ash and not cleaning up, and just fighting against them to bring awareness, I think has helped on so many levels. So now you see more Duke Energy commercials about how they're helping with the environment. Of course, a lot of it is hypocritical, in some way they say, hey, we're going green, but they're still dumping coal ash. So, but it's brought that awareness. And once again, that's a local effort. So we look at what's happening global. And I think a lot of that it has to do with politicians. But if you focus on the local level, you and your faith congregation can do things to bring about a change.
Well, we've got a question here that I want to follow up with what you just said, Todd. When we go hyper-local, we go to the relationships that we have with our friends and our families and our colleagues. And I think in this group today, a lot of the discussion shows that we're on the same page. We're thinking about the same things, but not everybody is thinking about climate change in that way, thinking about our responsibility to the environment, or thinking about justice issues in this way. This is a big question for this moment, particularly in America, but what is a good way to love and encourage those in our faith communities who, don't share, our current thoughts about this, who we might disagree with?
For me, Jamie, it's been connecting with my parishioners with their ancestors. For example, urban farming and gardening. Most African Americans who are 60 and older don't want to farm or don't want to be connected with farming because they grew up sharecropping, or their parents or grandparents have been abused. And I like to say African Americans have been divorced from the land here in America because of the free labor that we gave for 400 years, because of the cruel treatment. So when you look at these opportunities, it is a chance to reconnect with your ancestors when you reconnect with the soil, in particular for African Americans, and it brings back respect to the sorrows and the disrespect that they have connected with the land. So anyone or any person of faith are going to be very sensitive about their ancestors. So when you, Chaplain Naijla said, when you talk about your ancestors and what your family has done, that is a way to pull people in. So I would say, in particular, for my community, it's connecting folk with their ancestors. And let me just give you this quote real quick. In the 1920s, there was over 1 million farmers, Black farmers. By 2020, there was less than 50,000 Black farmers. So you're going from 1 million in 1920 to less than 50,000 now. Why? Because we've been divorced from the land. So what better way to talk about environmental justice than to bring up, hey, look, if you work the land, if you get reconnected with the land, you are bringing honor and respect to your ancestors.
I would echo that, exactly right. For me, if we look, the concept, people say, oh, well, Jewish environmentalism, that's like a new thing. Like, no, this is our major holidays are all focused around the earth and the time of year and the harvest and the crops and all. Right now, we are between Passover and Shavuot. So Passover deals with the arrival of the barley harvest effectively, and Shavuot is after 7 weeks that we count, and we're celebrating the first fruits. And we count every day right now, and it's called the Omer because it was when we would bring a sheaf, a measure of this grain to the temple. So this is a part of what we do. And I like to play on the idea of the Hebrew word for responsibility is achrayut, and the root of that word is acher, the other. It is on us to think of the other. That doesn't mean that we have to abandon everything that we're doing, but we can't continue the way that we are without thinking about the other person. So whether it's somebody from another community, and obviously the earth is tied in with that. And it's not some politically hip idea right now to be concerned about the climate. This is a moral reality that is grounded in various traditions, and certainly in Jewish life, it's very easy to find that. So I try to use that not to shame people, but to say, think about this for a second from a different angle, or look what's here.
Yeah, I really like that. I think sometimes in the environmental movement, we've sort of done a disservice to what we really want to accomplish. It's easy to fall into we've got to, we better, and the shame. So I think our role in congregational life is to start with gratitude, where we happen to notice abundance, and really build on that. And the opportunity for deepening of community and relationships. These are all invitations for us to build stronger bonds in our, not only in our congregations, but in our neighborhoods, in our city and county. I always fall back at Charles Eisenstein in Sacred Economy has this beautiful thing. It's not about, we shouldn't talk about what we're going to have less of. We want to talk about what we're going to have more of, more wonderful potlucks, more arts opportunities in parks, more spaces to gather together, more interesting kinds of foods that we're sharing with one another, not less. These are opportunities to live into a vision of abundance.
I'll just say from the Muslim perspective, I think one way of maybe helping people to enter the conversation that might not either be in it already or might have different opinions is encouraging your religious leaders to have sermons. I know that's something that's, hearing a religious leader be able to tell you these connections and the importance of taking care of the earth and the environment and justice and all these connections can sometimes be really helpful in the Muslim community because you have a leader who is giving you some advice and suggestions. And then when you have religious communities doing those activities together, that's another way of rooting it, kind of away from the individual and more in the community, taking a leadership role in that sense.
Great. Well, we are running out of time. So I just wanted to do a quick round for our very last question. So in maybe a minute or 30 seconds, what is sustaining you spiritually, emotionally, ethically this past year and a half that's been so challenging? Sometimes I just think sharing these as we leave our Zoom session can be a great way to remember that gratitude for abundance, to remember what we do have.
I can jump in if y'all don't mind.
Sure.
So last year around this time, I'll share that my father-in-law was in the hospital with COVID. And going through that process of seeing my partner, on the phone with the hospital every single day, it was such a blessing and a privilege to be able to have the outdoors. So while we were going through these extremely difficult conversations, we were like walking outside barefoot on the grass, feeling the breeze, seeing the birds, like just a moment to be in nature while you're simultaneously dealing with something so stressful, really helped to balance out the wild emotions that we were really experiencing. And
we might have lost Naijla. Are other folks experiencing that?
Yes.
Okay.
I think she's frozen.
Naijla will unfreeze us and join us in a minute, but I think that's a great one. Being outdoors. Todd, what do you got for what's sustaining you these days?
Well, I want to talk about justice. We can't get off this call with talking about where we are with the justice in this country. So justice is sustaining me through the work that I'm doing, environmental justice, but also with social justice. when you look at Floyd's loss of life, there is no justice for he and his family. But in Micah 6:8, it says, what does God require of us except for us to act justly, love mercy? We saw mercy on yesterday, and we have to love what we saw. And then it says, walk humbly before your God. So connecting with nature, as Naijla has said, and being humble and understanding how my chickens and my bees and my plants all go together is a beautiful thing. And it's taught me more about justice from connecting with nature than I could have ever learned from doing social justice in an organized ministers conference.
Thank you.
I'm always learning from Bishop Todd, and I just want to echo that for me these days, my most important work integrated with prayer practice as a cisgender white guy with economic privilege is always to try to figure out what is decolonizing my consciousness. And so really in nature, asking permission, even of the trees and wake Robin Trillium right now, is it okay to be here and introduce myself and give thanks to them? And when I'm planting seeds, to give thanks, and to when I'm harvesting the last of the kale that's bolting right now, is to be able to just say, you're sacrificing for us. What an amazing gift. Just to really seek to build that relationship. And that helps me to understand how I'm supposed to be in the human community.
I think for me, as much as we make fun of Zoom all the time, and there's been a lot of good Zoom humor over this year, and I really miss being able to go to the fairgrounds for the Earth Day weekend, because I know I was walk away with some tomato plants and some kale, or who knows what else I wind up buying. But you come on the call and it's like, oh, look at that. There's 22 participants here. How amazing. Like, that's great. People, we still care about each other. So when I go into a temple for a service or a teaching or whatever, it's like, oh, look, here we are. So that we sustain and maintain community in whatever formats we can do, because we as humans genuinely need each other, and can rely and lift each other up during the most difficult of times, especially.
Well, I'm just so grateful to each of you for being part of our community, for being the leaders that you are, and for being part of PEA's community. I feel inspired and sustained by the work that you're doing, by the ways that you're thinking, and just about, like you said, Rabbi Mark, the way I feel connected over this Zoom session. And I know already seeing in the chats, folks echoing that sentiment. So thanks everyone for being here today for this interfaith panel discussion on environment and climate and justice. I think we could have another, 10 hours right now and still not be done with the topic. So more coming soon. Thank you again. And I hope you all have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you to colleagues and friends for you to be on with you. Is a real honor. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone, and thanks to our listening audience as well.
Amen.
Thanks all.